And now, drum roll, please. After a long hiatus, we're bringing back epidemiologist Fred Brown, who, what, all of 21 pretty much. We had him on almost every week, I think, because there was just so much craziness going on with the pandemic. And so now everyone thinks, heck, that pandemic's behind us. We don't need no stinking masks or anything like that. What's the story, Fred?
Well, it's an interesting story. It's a variable one. It depends on where you are and how what your risk levels are and what your vaccination status is, and a whole bunch of other things that determine really whether you should wear a mask or not. Not kind of a general mandate for all people at all times. So we're getting to a point where we're getting more sophisticated about what we can do about COVID as well as how we can monitor it. And so we'll start to see much more directed thoughts about, okay, for you in your situation at your location, here's what you should do. And sometimes you should wear a mask and sometimes you don't have to. So, and it always should be an N95 mask. Don't be fooled by by
The
not.
surgical masks and all those, right?
Yeah.
Cotton or whatever.
The cloth masks aren't as effective against very transmissible diseases like Omicron. But let me show you some of the things I put together for you.
Oh, let me switch you over here. I gotta put my
All
glasses
right.
back on
Oh
here.
yeah, I've got a few things
All
to
right.
show you guys. I think you'll be interested in. You know,
All right, you're all set.
remember last year at this time we were all talking about the fact that we thought we were pretty much done, and I thought that we should kind of monitor a perfect reduction in vaccination rates versus what a non-vaccinated should look like. And if those started to cross, then you knew that you were getting into a non-vaccinated kind of environment and due to the variant changes, and you needed to adjust. And I thought that was going to occur in October. Sadly, I was wrong. It actually occurred, as you know, in August with Delta. Let me see if I can get onto a slideshow here. And here we are, 3/7/22. And I remember last year we were thinking about, gosh, are we done yet? At this very time. And
Yes,
at that point we thought we were done. And at this point,
and then another painful year ensued, right? So.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can avert that, but we're becoming pretty confident. So here is what the state of Michigan is doing. And as you can see, the case count has fallen from a high of 17,000 cases a day on the 15th of January, where we hit our peak, to less than 1,000 cases a day. Basically, I looked at this last night.
Hey, I was in there on January 11th. I tested positive. So
there you go. Yeah, and
that's why it spiked, so
yeah. Well, I'm such a social butterfly, Mike.
That's right.
He was hugging and kissing everyone and spread it all over the place, so.
The super spreader event of the year. So what Michigan is starting to do is they're starting to look at community level. So instead of talking about the entire state simultaneously, saying the whole state of Michigan must, have these kinds of regulations, they're starting to say, if you're in these kinds of communities and they're looking at new COVID case rates, they're looking at admissions per 100,000 to make sure your hospitals aren't getting overwhelmed, and looking at percent of inpatient beds already occupied. So those things they think really determine whether or not we're going to have, a high mortality rate. We have got to make adjustments or not. And you can see that the counties now that we think are more at risk with their current community, and sort of the middle of the state and in the thumb in the UP near Wisconsin, we think right now you're still at a high rate of risk. And therefore, this is kind of thinking about mask mandates. Anyone in the low to medium range, the state of Michigan is indicating, don't worry too much about masks. And if you're in a high community, you should wear your mask. We'll see how really this isn't exactly precise in a second. So they're worried about the weather map generally, and then they're worried about, that's the risk of actually coming down with COVID, and they weren't worried about the risk of spreading COVID. And that largely is determined by how close the communities are tied together. And interacting, as well as what their vaccination rates are. And you can see that actually we have about 6 counties or 7 counties in Michigan that are the most vulnerable in the entire United States. So out of several, I'm not sure exactly how many counties, there's several thousand counties, we're 20% of us are at the most vulnerable rate, given our vaccination rates and closeness of interaction, mixing, and mobility. So what Michigan is starting to do is they're starting to say, we think that because you're coming now into a more community level instead of a more state level, we can actually understand where you are in this cycle of pre-surge, response, and post-surge. And they're hoping that more and more we're going to be in the post-surge environment. Those post-surges are going to start to expand and take over more and more. The challenge we have is that we just don't have the testing infrastructure to pull this off, because the readiness piece in pre-surge means that you can actually detect when you've got high levels of positivity in your community, and therefore start to respond early. And there are two problems with that. The first is that our testing infrastructure doesn't have enough density, it doesn't have enough speed, it doesn't have enough accuracy to be able to determine that, to determine whether we're getting into a situation where we're starting to go up that exponential curve. The result is we tend to have to wait until you see hospitalizations increasing. And by that time, you're already in the soup, because as you know, that exponential growth just is way too fast for us to catch up as humans. Our entire economy, all of our governmental agencies are built on linear growth and linear responses. And here's this thing's going exponentially. So once again, I think we're going to be surprised and caught and have to, kind of come back to a Michigan level and return back and return. The other big problem is that most of the counties who have the highest incidences of, being at risk are also those who have the least infrastructure and are least compelled to go in and get tested. And the last issue is that we are having a lot more self-testing. And if you think about it, back 6 months ago, we were pushing almost all of our tests through the PCR environment. And now, considerable proportion of our tests are being done at home and not reported. And so we really don't understand what our positivity rate is, because people who are testing at home and not reporting in, that is a big gap in our data set. And so we can't respond very effectively, if that makes sense. So that's the strategy, but I'm concerned that we don't have the testing infrastructure in place to actually be able to monitor whether our strategy is working successfully or not. So let's look at the bigger picture in the overall United States. You saw this picture before. I filled in what happened since we last spoke on January, I think it was January 20th. And you can see that basically, my predictions are my predictions are the blue line. So what I had to do was I had to adjust for Omicron. I was originally predicting for Delta, and I made these predictions back in August 1st, and then I had to continue running to make sure I was on track. And I quickly realized in the middle of October that Omicron was going to change the game, and so I resubmitted I changed the algorithm, and you can see that the algorithms now is quite well dialed in terms of how high things went. I was within about 10% of the peak of the height, and within a couple of days of when that occurred. And right now I was tracking to having 60,000 cases on March 1st, and we were at 58,900 or so. So we're tracking pretty well. And the question is, where will it land? And my guess is that we're going to continue to drop until we hit about 20 to 30,000 cases a day through the summer. And at that point, we're going to have to watch in the fall to see whether or not we once again have monitoring these variants of concern, as well as seeing what happens as we start to migrate into unventilated areas again. And I think we're going to sadly probably see a possible surge just because of our poor vaccination rates in some areas and our slowness to respond. So I don't think it's going to be as high, and it's going to be a much better year than last year, but we're still going to have some challenges. So here are some of the myths that we talked about, right? The first one is, hey, the pandemic's over. And sadly, I would love it if the pandemic was over. But the truth is that our current levels of global vaccination rates and natural immunity, there is a really high likelihood that we're going to have another big new variant with a high transmission and likely immune escape from a lot of our interventions like vaccines and medicines. So this is what you should do. Instead of saying, I live in Clare County and therefore don't have to wear a mask anymore, you should really adjust your behavior to COVID levels, your health status, your acceptable risk, and the activities that you are conducting in that weather area. So that's what you really should be doing as an individual. we don't need masks is the next big myth, right? And the truth is that there are a lot of vulnerable people, a lot of immunocompromised people. There's probably almost 100 million Americans who haven't been vaccinated, and many of these people don't have infection-acquired immunity, and so they continue to be at risk. And so you really do want to use a fitted N95 mask when you're in an unventilated large area, close quarters room or facility with large crowds for more than 15 minutes. So you want to continue to do that. And my recommendation is a 3M 1650 or the Honeywell DC 365. Those are the.
How good are the Chinese knockoffs of the N95 masks? These babies, the KN95.
We did test them. They're not as good as the ones I recommend. They are better than a lot of the cloth masks. Some of the masks that we are actually putting on ourselves actually cause aerosolization. So they have their gaps are so large they actually cause a greater transmission of the problem. The thing about masks is that the risks and the protections are asymmetric. I don't know how many people know this, but if I am sick and I am not wearing a mask and you are trying to protect yourself and you are wearing a mask, there's still, about, believe it or not, almost a 70% likelihood of transmission in a very crowded, unventilated area if you're there with me for more than an hour. Now, if I'm sick and I'm wearing a mask and you're not sick and not wearing a mask, that risk goes down to 5%.
Okay.
And if you're both wearing masks, then it goes down to 0.5%. So you can get a sense of just, unfortunately, if I try to protect myself with a mask and you're sick and not wearing a mask, I'm actually less protected. I'm protecting you much more than you're protecting me.
But having school children wear masks is child abuse, right? I mean, I can't believe some of the stuff.
Well, so it's interesting with children. If you're in a community that's highly vaccinated and you've got a couple of kids that aren't, it's probably pretty safe, except if those kids happen to be immunocompromised or they have diabetes or some other condition, right? And all of a sudden you want to have the school adjust to that, denominator, not to, in general, I'm in this county and therefore don't have to worry about it. That's not what the public health would say. It depends on the level of risk the children are at, not the general weather in the community at large. So the next big myth is that the virus is contained, right? Well, we're still averaging about 50,000 confirmed new cases a day. That's a hell of a lot of virus in the air, and this is more than, in fact, it's more than threefold the level of new cases and twofold the number of COVID hospitalizations in June of 2021, which were we were at our nadir, but just before Delta hit. And so the metrics do not indicate that we are we've contained the virus successfully. And you have to know and adjust your behaviors to COVID levels in the area that you're in order to really act responsibly for yourself, protect yourself and everybody around you. I am protected without a vaccine, right? There's enough vaccination around there that I don't have to worry anymore. There's herd immunity. That's just not the case. Our levels of vaccination are some of the lowest in the Western world. And we're going to pay dearly for it and continue to pay dearly for it until it gets higher or much higher. So get boosted and keep your vaccination status current. The vulnerable are all set. They're in nursing homes. They know how to protect themselves. Everything's fine. The answer is no. They're not at all protected at this point. And the protection, the vaccination rates and booster rates of people over 65 in the United States is 66%. In the UK, it's 92%. And the UK is still having outbreaks, right? So, we got to get to 95, 96, 98%. And that 65 plus group is by far the most protected in our community. In fact, between the 0 and 5, there's no vaccination available. And that's, that's 19 million people. That's a lot of people to be carrying on the vaccine. So you should wear an N95 vest around immunocompromised in the vulnerable population if you can. And of course, the last big thing is, hey, look, it's gotten better. Delta was very virulent, and now we've got Omicron, and yeah, it's a little bit more transmissible. But gosh, great news is people aren't dying as much as they were. That is true, but it has no bearing on whether or not the next variant of concern is going to be more virulent or less virulent than Omicron. It's going to have to be more transmissible, but it sure as heck could be a lot more deadly. And you can see that in the disease itself, right? First we came out with D16, the Wuhan variant. that was much less virulent than the Alpha, which became more virulent, which was much less virulent than Delta, which was Delta just happened to be more virulent than Omicron. So we thought, we're going through that final stage. We're not there yet. We've got a few more variants to go. It may eventually start to become less virulent, but we sure can't assume that from the data available today. So it's early days, we're only 2 years into this thing. We've had small.
Seems like two millennia, but go ahead. Yeah.
No, doesn't it? Even our world leaders are going stir crazy, apparently, picking fights and creating wars at places they really are.
Yeah, must be what's going on with Putin, right? So.
Oh man, well, I think he was. No, I'm not an expert at that. Let me just say that. So. Now, what we're starting to get into is Omicron now has subvariants, right? The BA1, the BA2, the BA3. You've heard about the BA2 because that was called the stealth variant. And what we found was that basically the good news was that it was less virulent, but it was quite a bit more infectious. And in fact, what happened when people thought they were in good shape because they just gotten over Omicron was, in fact, the reinfection rate was almost 2.5 times that of the reinfection rate for Delta. So if you got Omicron once and then you thought, I'm done now, actually the chances of you getting reinfected with again was 2.5 times that if you were in the same circumstances of Delta. Now, the reason they call it the stealth virus, the stealth Omicron, is because normally we could find Omicron with the PCR tests, and what we'd find is that the spike protein was so changed under Omicron that it would fall out. We wouldn't see it, so we just have 2 readings, and says, that's Omicron. Unfortunately, the stealth Omicron, it has the same level of infectivity, and it shares about 30% of the same genetic changes as regular Omicron, but it doesn't fall out. So you have to actually do the test to say, it is Omicron, we have to worry about this. And it actually outcompeted the BA1 in Denmark and was starting to do that in the UK. So we have to worry a little bit about the fact that we're going to get an Omicron or an Omicron Delta variant that actually can outcompete Omicron and cause more disease again. Today, we know that the BA variants are the BA2 variants are actually resistant to the same monoclonal antibodies therapies as BA1. It also reduces the effectiveness of sotrovimab, which was the GSK monoclonal antibody, which we were using as the first line defense now that the Regeneron and Lilly antibodies weren't working so well. And that, in fact, the efficacy of BA1 was 90%, but BA2 is only 70% for the vaccine. We'll start to see that's going to become important. So we are we're really looking now for the Delta Omicron variant of the future that kind of pulls together both of those strains of disease. It's possibly a brand new environment, a brand new kind of variant that we're going to have to worry about next. But you can see why I was kind of surprised by the variant, because I thought that on August 1st, when we started to see Delta, I changed my algorithm. Unfortunately, you can see that the switch from Delta to Omicron occurred just about within a month. We went from 90% Delta to 10% Delta, and it was replaced completely by Omicron. So and you can start to see that light pink shade of color on the very top. That's the BA2 virus coming in now. So we're sort of watching that one. On the next page, let's see there we are. So I said it was milder, and here's the evidence that it was milder. It actually resulted in about 2.8 times lower the hospitalization rate. So overall, Omicron had 5 times the case rate, but only 1.8 times that of the hospitalization rate. And you can see that in the green bars. There's the Delta, late August, early September. And you can see that, you had a very tight relationship between an increase in hospitalization and an increase in cases with death. And that death piece on the bottom dotted line isn't quite so correlated with the spike that we saw in Omicron. And that's the evidence of that. But don't forget, so you saw the hospital admissions 2.7% versus 7.8% for Omicron, and it's affected different people differently. So the under 18-year-old population, you'll see that in a second, really was very highly infected by Omicron, much more so than Delta, and the infection rates in unvaccinated also were much higher under the Omicron environment than they were in Delta. So here's what happened with children, though, and you can see that same graph. And in this case, you can see that, in fact, the children under 5 years old under Delta had 2.9 to 100,000 were hospitalized. Under Omicron, it was almost 7 times more. Under 18, it was also about 6 times more. We think that's largely a vaccination effect. So when you think about when Delta hit and how many children were vaccinated and what their percent vaccination rate is, if you look at what happened with the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated, you can see there's a very high correlation between an event that would put you in the hospital and being unvaccinated. So the takeaways here are that different variants might affect different age groups far differently in the future. So if you suddenly think you have to watch and monitor a variant of concern, you want to look at what it's happening to patients like you. You shouldn't rely on what Omicron or Delta did in the past. You should think about, gosh, is it more deadly for the diabetes patients than the old variants? Is it more deadly for the middle age than it was before, et cetera? So that you can dial and dial your own protections accordingly. And you can see that the 0 to 5 age group remains extremely vulnerable until a vaccine is authorized. And the first chance we're going to get at that, given the third dose, what happened was they didn't have high enough dosage in the kids between 2 and 4 or 2 and 5 in the 0 to 5 group. And they only gave them 0.3 of a milligram instead of 30 milligrams. I'm sorry, 3 milligrams instead of 30 milligrams. So 10% of the dose of the adult dose of the 11-year-olds were getting. And that we think that just wasn't quite enough to cause an immune response in those children. And so now we're giving them a third dose. And that third dose assessment will be done probably around April 15th, according to Pfizer. So the big question is, how many people really have died of COVID? And the answer is more than we actually think. And the way we know that is as immunologists, epidemiologists, is we look at the excess deaths that happened, when COVID started, what we would have expected to have under a normal situation. And we've looked at this over a 5-year period, the 5 years prior, and then the 2 years during COVID. And we found that, in fact, there are significant large excess deaths. And in fact, right now we're saying that the official confirmed reported death rate of COVID was 958,437 as of this morning. But if you do the calculations, we're probably closer to the true count of over a million. So we're at 1.02 million right now, not 958,000. And that's significant because it's a much higher number, obviously, 200,000 people. And it's also significant because you have to think about that in terms of risk and what the true mortality rates are, what the true transmission rates are, and so on. So we have to kind of adjust this as epidemiologists to figure that out. And you can see that Michigan is one of the top worst 15 states in the country when it comes to, it's number 15, in fact, when it comes to excess deaths. So we've been hit harder, much harder actually, than most states. The worst state, you can see is Arizona. They had 26% extra deaths. We're down at 18.3% excess deaths. So if you start to move this from the United States to the world, we've actually done some modeling, and the IHME group out of Seattle and The Economist and a few other real experts have tried to kind of say, okay, well, let's transfer this to the confirmed death versus the excess deaths. And they also went back 5 years and looked at the period of time during COVID, and they think that the excess death number is in the order of 20 million extra deaths.
Wow.
We've reported 5 million deaths. We actually had about 20. And this that's significant because it puts us, when you look at Spanish flu, that was 75 million excess deaths. So it's not as bad as Spanish flu, but it actually, exceeds any other major pandemics we've had since 1918. And the reason for that is because India and Africa underreported significantly. In Africa, largely because those were attributed to other diseases. India, because people were sadly, dying so quickly that they didn't have a correct count. So that's what we think kind of happened, and how bad this disease is. So it's pretty bad. And the question is, what can you do about it? And the answer is, well, you could wait until you got it. And we do have a great antiviral called Paxlovid, which Pfizer, has gotten approval for late this year. But unfortunately, they only are going to be able to make 200 million doses for the entire world this year. It has about 90% effectiveness rate if you catch it in the first 5 days of disease, right? And that's what's so important, and why Biden talked about test and treat. Because what you have to do is test and then very rapidly be able to immediately give the person a treatment. In Europe, they can do that easily because pharmacists are allowed to give out drugs based on diagnostic tests. In the United States, we don't have that authority yet, with the exception of a few tests like pregnancy tests and so on. So we largely rely on a cycle that includes a doctor, that takes a lot of time, that then includes the pharmacy, that takes a lot of time, that then is driving around and getting other people sick. So we're hoping that we can drive to one point, or even have something delivered to us at our home, test, and then show the result and say, okay, therefore I need Paxlovid right away. And that would reduce that speed. The speed at which you do that cycle is very critical to how effective any of these drugs are, frankly, but especially Paxlovid. Molnupiravir is only 30% effective, and it also is mutagenic. As a result of that, the EU actually declined its approval. The United States did approve it, but I would like to see other antiviral cocktails available in order to control this disease, right? You don't just want to have one Paxlovid there. You want to have, like we have for HIV, 3 or 4 good antivirals that collectively do the job and are so quick in their ability to kill off the virus that the virus can't reproduce resistant strains. So as long as you don't have a whole host of things to get of antivirals to go after this, we are actually at risk of starting to select for better and better variants of the virus to be used against us. The intravenous injections, or remdesivir, is available. It does require you to be, in a facility for 3 days of getting those injections. It's available, and it is highly effective. So we'll certainly recommend that. The monoclonal antibodies, you can see, are a little bit more, as I said, for the Omicron. This is the BA2 variant, actually reduced efficacy by 35-fold. So it is a little bit less efficacious than it was against Delta, but it still works. But the other 2 older monoclonal antibodies, the Lilly and the Regeneron therapies, actually don't work. So you shouldn't take those. But they've just approved 2 new monoclonal antibodies. These are only really reserved for people who are immunocompromised, basically, or who are super high risk of severe COVID-19, but not yet hospitalized. So in other words, you've been exposed, you're really high risk, so you better get a monoclonal antibody just in case to fight it off in a prophylaxis. That's what the bebtelovimab was approved for, and the Evusheld is also just for immunocompromised, so it's even more constricted, and only has 50,000 doses per week availability, which is pretty low when you consider that 1 dose is only 1/5 of what you need. So that when you have treatment medicines that are in such short supply, then you can start to protect yourself with PPE. We talked a little about masking, but really the way you beat this thing is with vaccinations and boosters. And you can see that this is what the CDC indicates. Their data indicates, and I showed you last time that it was about 128-fold for Moderna, and about 58-fold, as I recall, 70-fold for Pfizer. And you can see that they basically said, if you're unvaccinated, and you get the disease, you are 97 times more likely to die than if you're boosted.
Hmm.
So that's the bottom line. And we now have, and this is the result of almost the result of 100 million patient analysis. There's really, we're not wrong about these numbers. We can talk about, whether it's, several decimal points down, does it 96.644 or is it 98.347? But as far as order of magnitude goes, this is what you're facing. If you only get 2 doses, you're 14 times more protected than if you are unvaccinated, but you're still about 5-6 times, I'm sorry, 6 to 7 times more at risk than someone who's been boosted. So it gives you a feel for just how important this boosting is. And I want to encourage everyone listening to get a boost. And here's why. This is what happens. You can see these drop off on the left-hand side. You can start to see consistently how every vaccine starts what they call wane. And you can see that on the bottom axis is time, and on the vertical axis on the left-hand side is amount of your protection, right? How much efficacy is, how much effectiveness the vaccine has. And you can see those dots dropping in the gray area, right? On the far left. In the middle white section, you can see, we've been boosted. And all of a sudden, protections again jump way back up. And that's true about every mRNA vaccine. And then finally, they start to drop again. And after about 150 days, you're not very well protected. And so you want to get another boost. So, and then you can see this is the third boost it brings you right back up again. And then what's happened in Israel is they've actually looked at a 4th boost. And you can see, once again, it brings you right back up again to where you want to be. Now, this is a seasonal virus. So our biggest risk of being infected is going to be right about now until April. So if you were boosted had your last vaccination in the kind of September, October, November timeframe, I would have tried to get a boost if you can, because it does restore your protections by about 8 to 9-fold right now during what could be one of the more challenging periods of keeping yourself well. Now we're on a downward trend generally, which is great, but you can't get that much more protected until we hit September. I showed you last time we spoke that actually the safety profiles of a boost on a 4th boost in Israel were exactly the same as those for a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd shot. So it doesn't really change your safety profile, but it does increase your protections. What's interesting is that there are some differences between vaccines that are starting to show up. It looks like the Moderna vaccine is getting is improving each time from variant to variant. Now this will change. We know this in hindsight. So if you're worried about the current variants, then probably Moderna is about 30% more effective than the Pfizer full dose. And you can look at hazard and the adjusted hazard ratios down here on the bottom. What's more important, though, is what's happening on a global basis. And you can see on a global basis what's happened is that most of the vaccines in the world today are being produced and distributed by 4 companies: CoronaVac, Pfizer, Sinopharm, and AstraZeneca. The AstraZeneca vaccine is not effective against Omicron. The CoronaVac vaccine is also, as you can see on this on this piece here, you can see the graph on the top of the page on the right-hand side. Against Omicron, Pfizer was 59% effective. This is in real world, and this is over time. And that unfortunately the Sinovac was only 7% effective. So when you have such a big difference in effectiveness rates, just because your country says we're 75% vaccinated, doesn't mean you've been vaccinated with a great vaccine. Luckily, in the United States, we do have great vaccines, and these are some of the best vaccines. Well, these are the best vaccines I've ever worked on. And I've worked in this space for 40 years. So this is, the Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech vaccines are incredibly effective. But unfortunately, the CoronaVac Sinopharm vaccines aren't so effective. And you can see what happens when that occurs, right? Here's Hong Kong. About 40% of their population was vaccinated with Sinovac on the bottom of the page, and about 60% was vaccinated by BioNTech. That 40% though, because it was only 7% effective, I don't know if you can see it very well, but basically Hong Kong in terms of death rate was just flat until March 5th. Maybe until about March 3rd. And all of a sudden, I should say, at the end of February, but in the last 5 or 6 days, Hong Kong has gone off the charts because their vaccines waned and they didn't catch it. And this is the sort of thing that can happen time and time again. And that, of course, it creates a breeding ground for new variants that can affect us, right? Because it is somewhat effective, but not fully effective. And that's the perfect breeding ground to find and select the next best variant. And of course, from Hong Kong, you fly over all over the world. And that's exactly how the variants get spread. So that's why it's, why you want to be careful a little bit about saying we're all done now. It's because we're actually dependent on what's happening in the rest of the world as well. The second reason beyond the death rate is that you should get boosted is because you'll become a lot less infectious and dangerous to other people. And this is the Pfizer vaccine in blue, and this is the placebo unvaccinated person in red. And what they were looking at was over time, what was your viral load level? And it found out that the viral load, and this is a logarithmic table, right? So when we go from 4 to 6, that's squared. So in other words, you're about 100 times less. You have about 100 times less viral load, when you've been vaccinated than if you haven't been vaccinated with Omicron. Mm. That means that if you think about viral load is what causes you to breathe things out and spew out when you're sick, that actually causes more infection. So if you haven't gotten vaccinated, you're much more infectious for a much longer time, almost double the time. You can see that basically the Pfizer vaccine, you're stopping finding it. You're starting to get to the limits of detection at day 4, and for the unvaccinated, you got to wait till day 14. So you get a sense of, gosh, you're 100 times more infectious for 3 times longer if you don't get vaccinated. And that's why the countries that have been vaccinated are looking a lot better than we are. We'll get to that in the end. The third reason that you should get boosted is because you have a much lower risk of getting long COVID. And I'll get into that in a second, but long COVID is a much more significant disease than people are aware of today, but they will get increasingly aware of it in the future because people who are asymptomatic are going to get long COVID, surprisingly. Children are going to get long COVID for the rest of their lives. And 30% of the adults with symptoms are likely to get long COVID. And what it does, long COVID does a couple of things. First, it causes vascular rupture in the brain. So small amounts of blood clotting and blood release into the brain cause you a lot of fog and fatigue. And of course, and you can see this, that's the first issue that you've got. The second issue you've got is that COVID actually lodges into your organs and is a reservoir there for extended periods of time that allows the virus to come and go and give you these extra symptoms. And you can see in these side by side, the brain, the brown pieces are the areas where you've got active COVID virus, and the versus on the left-hand side, that is normal brain tissue. And when you have active normal virus in your brain, we know that causes more activity. It can cause disruptions to the parasympathetic nervous system, which causes you heart trouble and digestive problems. And more importantly, is it can be the onset of degenerative brain diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So we're going to start to catch up with us in the brain. It's going to start to catch up with us in the lungs, where people can't breathe so well. With cardiovascular, a lot of people are finding myocarditis is occurring. That means that you'll be fine for a while, and suddenly your heart will get, you'll suddenly have an infection of the heart, and suddenly you'll die of myocardial infarction. 4 months into it, or have palpitations that require lifelong support afterwards. Those kinds of things, and of course, your immune system and circulatory systems are affected for the rest of your life as well. We think we don't have the sometimes these things will go away, but sometimes, and so far 10% of the cases and more, we're seeing this occurring. And these are about 200 different symptoms that people are getting from this. So if you have type 2 diabetes, if you are exposed to a very high viral load, if you are susceptible to myocarditis generally, or if you've had Epstein-Barr, then this could be reactivated, and you're at a much higher risk of getting long COVID. So those are some of the things around long COVID and the way to protect yourself. And that's true in teens as well. So here are the teens, and you can see in the yellow some of the worst things, right? Significant chest pains, palpitations, difficulty breathing 3 months in, and persistent coughs and dizzinesses. That's what long COVID feels like to children, and that's been now ongoing for an extended period of time. These lines don't stop. And the p-values here are very high. This is among 20,000 participants in studies, in match studies. The way to avoid this is to get vaccinated. Those who have 2 doses of vaccination reduce long COVID symptoms by what looks like about 50%, all the way through the different types of symptoms. So that's another reason, again, to get full vaccine and to stay boosted, because you want to prevent getting COVID to begin with. And if you get COVID, you want to have the long COVID the long COVID risk be reduced as much as possible. Right now, the US ranks 68th. So in 2-dose vaccinations, we are just behind Slovakia and Thailand. Actually, that's for 3-dose. We're slightly better for boosters. This chart is ranked for boosters, so you can get a sense of boosters. Yeah, we're just behind for boosting. We're number 55 in the world, and that's just behind Slovakia, Thailand, Poland, and so on. That's where we rank right now, and that's what our level of risk in this country is right now. That's why I'm encouraging everyone listening in to please get your booster shots, because if we had that and we had the same rate of vaccination, this is something from Financial Times, we could have avoided half of the hospitalizations that we've had to date. Half. I mean, think about the ruinous effect it has on your economy to have millions and millions of people being hospitalized for an average of 7.5 days length of stay, and a lot of them not coming out of the hospital because they've died. That is just a huge impact on the society, on social fabric, on people's well-being generally, and
the burden it's placed on healthcare workers. My God.
Oh my gosh, yeah, just horrendous, right? So the conclusion is that the U.S. actually suffered 63% higher overall mortality than the EU during this period of Omicron. 63% more. Just imagine if we just gotten up to that 90% vaccination rate, we would have had 63% fewer deaths than we've hit in the United States today.
Is that from the New York Times? I would love to share that graphic. I would love to have that graphic.
I can get you the citation. I usually put the citation. I didn't put it in this time. I'll get you the citation.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's world news actually. But the idea here is please do boost, because it's going to lower your transmission and risk of infecting others. It's going to reduce the incidence and your susceptibility to long COVID. It's going to lower the hospitalization rates and the pressure on the hospitals, and it will lower mortality rates by, as we said, about 97-fold.
Let me ask you, Fred. I had my 2 Pfizer shots, and then I had my booster last October. So yeah. It's now March. Are you saying I should get a second booster?
Yeah, I think if I could, and I was immunocompromised during that situation, I absolutely would. And if I was thinking that I am more susceptible than most, I would get it also. I'm not in that age group, but I had my booster about the same time. I had my booster in October, and a family member who was with me at the time, who felt that she was at higher risk, went ahead and got a fourth booster and was happy that she did it.
Huh. Okay. All right. Wow. So
I went long, you guys. I'm so sorry. I didn't have any idea what the time was. So, so hopefully,
I wasn't about to stop you. If people want the deep dive, they can watch the whole thing.
so what's the 90-day outlook for spring? What are you advising people to do? Because everyone now is anxious to get out. The weather hopefully is going to change for the better. I don't know. It's been going back and forth here lately. But what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're vaccinated and you're going to visit people, in well-ventilated areas, and those people are also vaccinated and or have been already had COVID and have recovered, have pretty high immune systems, and if and you have some tests, there's a company called Event Farm that actually will if you have an event, it'll actually test everybody in advance of the event, tell everyone of their health status and risks, and then say, here's how to make your event safe. So if you're going to a big event and you have that, I would use that. And I would still try to stay masked when I was in really crowded, really tight, unventilated venues around people I didn't know what their health status was. But that's just me because I'm over 60 and I want to protect myself a little bit more. If you're
actually the youngest guy on this show right now. So
oh my gosh, you guys. So yeah, but so think about the actions. Think about know your COVID weather forecast. Know what your health status and the people around you, close to you's health status is, and then react and respond in an appropriate way, right? I mean, that's sort of the best thing I can tell everyone to do. It really does depend.
Okay, and so folks who want to reach out to you, get more information, go to your website. How do they do that?
FredBrown.com. I think we're linked. So hopefully when you print something, they can get over to my website and vice versa. So
yep,
great
absolutely.
to work together. And everything I do is I do everything for pro bono in the COVID space. So.